Welcome back, WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and WNST.net. We're all Baltimore positive up this week. If you have not heard Frank Kelly, if you have not heard Sheila Dixon, if you have not heard Ted Venetoulas, make sure you're checking that out. A couple weeks from now, coronavirus be damned. The man who saved my wife's life twice is getting married in Essen, Germany. We are going to try to make it over there, and if we do, you'll hear a lot of Baltimore positive around here, especially from mayoral candidates. I have talked to this guy this week about Trey Mancini and the Orioles and opening day 2 weeks away. Certainly all of us are dribbling and awaiting the brackets next week, and we got the cough next Thursday and Friday for March Madness, and we got the Big Ten tournament into the night on Friday. But football will appear again, sort of like Loch Ness Monster next week, right? And sometime around Tuesday or Wednesday when everyone's filling out their brackets, everyone will find out, and I guess the Rams fans found out what their new logo is, and it's that can't be the real. That's not the real logo, right, Luke? That thing the Rams did, right?
What's weird about it is it looks like it's the Chargers logo, too.
It's bizarre, man. There's no way that's real. That's got to be like New Coke.
Is this like what was it a few years back with is the dress blue or gold or whatever? That's what I feel like this logo is, right? Is it the Rams? Is it the Chargers? It's bad either way, but...
Yeah, but it's football week, right? So, other than that, this time next week, we're going to be talking about who the Rams and the Chargers have for cap space, and maybe they're chasing Matt Judon around. I mean, who knows? Give us a full lay of the land here. Eric DeCosta is back from Indianapolis. John Harbaugh's getting better. Some thoughts about this week and how it plays out and lays out in the pre-tampering period.
Well, I think this week you would think, and I think from the Ravens' perspective, probably, dare I say, hope to get some definitive word from Marshall Yanda. I think that's obviously a huge domino that needs to officially fall here, whether he's returning, whether he is retiring. I think you look at last year at the Combine, John Harbaugh at that point knew that Yanda was returning. Eric DeCosta at the Combine a couple weeks ago made no such mention about knowing what was going on with Marshall Yanda. So interpret that as you will. I think that you could kind of view that and maybe think maybe this is it for him. But I think you'd like to get some definitive word. Of course, we're going to have some definitive word, at least in terms of the franchise tag for Matthew Judon. That continues to be my expectation. I don't think he's hitting the market. I don't think the Ravens are necessarily committed to definitely giving him a long-term contract, but they're not going to just watch him walk, and they're not just going to let him leave for nothing. I guess not nothing. It would be a compensatory pick, but the thought would be, can you tag him and either work something out long-term, at least have him for 2020, or do you tag him with the thought of trading him, which we saw a few instances of that last year with NFL teams and franchise players. So I think those are the two pressing orders of business this week, but I also think, and this is something that applies not just to the Ravens, but the other 31 teams, but the uncertainty, the waiting for the CBA. Voting, of course, began last Thursday, lasts for a week. I think there are teams, including the Ravens, who probably have deals with probably lesser players, not necessarily big-name guys, because at this point trying to re-sign big-name guys is difficult because you're so close to hitting the market, but guys that kind of fall into that second, third, fourth tier of free agency. Guys for the Ravens like a Jihad Ward, like an Anthony Levine, guys that aren't necessarily your top priorities, but guys
But you have to have them,
you'd like to keep them, right? I mean,
well, you love veteran guys who know what the hell they're doing, right?
Sure.
And I think we saw that with the L.J. Forts and the Josh Bynes and even D'Amato Pekka on his, last surge thought he had 6 or 8 football games left in him and flew in from L.A. He's managing a restaurant out there with his family, and he's got $100 million in the bank. You know what I mean? Like the professionals that they assembled here once the season started last year. I mean, you got to tip your cap to Eric DeCosta and Ortiz and George Kokinis. I mean, the whole team for the way they evaluate talent. I mean, they are truly professionals. They really are.
Well, I think there's also you could look at it and say, well, they did have to rebuild the defense in the middle of the season. So you could kind of look and say, okay.
No doubt about it. They don't want to have to do that again.
But no question. Your point is well taken, and that's where in 2020 you'd like to be able to have some pieces in place where you don't have to do that in October like they did last year. Now, it worked, and they deserve all the credit in the world for that, and they clearly identified short-term fixes for some problems that are long-term that you'd like to address long-term now. Josh Bynes was he was a godsend for that inside linebacker room. Now, that said, 30 years old. Is he someone that you're viewing as a long-term piece that you're going to commit to? Probably not. I think if Josh Bynes is back, that's probably going to be more of a move where you wait and see. But to go back to what the point I was making as far as being a week out now from the start of free agency, certain guys that you identify like a Jihad Ward, whether it's an Anthony Levine or whether it's Justin Ellis, defensive tackle, or whatever. Any of those names you want to mention that aren't the top-tier Matt Judon, Jimmy Smith guys, there are a few guys that you would think the Ravens would like to keep from hitting free agency, but it's got to make sense and brings us back to this CBA issue where teams and players are curious to see how this is going to look, how it's going to impact the cap. In the case of someone like Matt Judon, and we've noticed we've seen very few announcements to this point as far as franchise tags around the league. Well, why? It's because teams are wondering is there a franchise tag? Is there a transition tag? Is it one? Is it both? And those are issues that are unresolved while we're waiting to see how the players vote for the new CBA. So it has held some things up. Not that nothing's happening. Josh Norman Monday morning signed a one-year deal with the Buffalo Bills, so it's not as though there's nothing going on, but there is a lot of hurry up and wait. Teams are making their plans, and certainly players are making their free agent plans and wanting to set up visits and do all those things they're going to do officially starting next week. But until everyone really knows if it's a new CBA or the final year of the current CBA, there is a little bit of a holding pattern, but it's not to say there isn't plenty to do. And as I said, not just the Judon tag situation, but trying to get a little more finality here, a little more definitive word with Marshall Yanda. My assumption all along is that the Ravens have prepared for this offseason, thinking he's not going to be returning in 2020, but that's not to say that Marshall Yanda, it's not as though they wouldn't make room for him if he says, yeah, I'm coming back for another season. So, but I think those are the two issues you're hoping to get a little more clarity on this week, knowing that the quote-unquote tampering period begins next Monday.
Well, and I think it's not just for the Ravens, right? How these pieces interlock in so many other places. And this is an interesting offseason, right? Like last year, we were making jokes about the Browns winning the Super Bowl by now, right? And the Steelers are always sort of the snake in the weeds. They never go away, fully. And much like the Ravens, they're well run and they're well coached, and they seemingly, stir back up, and they'll find a quarterback of their own when their time comes, probably, right? But the Roethlisberger part of that, the number one pick part of the Bengals, and them being, the joke and whatever Joe Burrow is going to do between now and the end of next month to screw around with them, and the Browns being whatever the Browns are. We don't think much about the rest of the division, but I would say around the rest of the league, the teams you're competing with in every category, in every way, and when you're drafting low and all of that stuff, sort of the Ravens machine as it is, this is the time of the year that if you're a fan, you really should appreciate that they sort of know what they're doing out there. They're sort of ahead of the game. Them getting eliminated and pissed off 3 weeks before everybody else, thought they should have been eliminated, put them back to work earlier on all of this stuff. They're returning coordinators, right? So they do have something going on out there that the expectations are through the roof, but their needs are kind of small. And I would think for what they're looking for in the draft on D-line, linebackers, wide receivers, what's happening with Yanda, To our point from the beginning, they're the 14-2 team. They're going to be one of the 2 or 3 favorites in Vegas if they're not already. I don't look at such things, but I'm sure we will when the draft goes to Vegas in 6 weeks. And Roger Goodell, who swore off Las Vegas for everybody in the league, is going to be standing in front of the pool at the Bellagio in 6 weeks, pulling names out of a hat, right? But that being said, the Ravens are going to live good here for 6 months, and everything they do is going to be perceived as being, well, that's one more piece in the puzzle, because it's going to make sense. The things they do are going to plug holes that all of us are sitting here and talking about over the next 6 weeks.
Well, I mean, that's the idea. It doesn't always turn out that way. I mean, typically what they do is going to be perceived well because they're a good franchise and they're a good organization. That's not to say the Ravens or the Patriots or the Steelers or Kansas City, whoever, aren't going to make mistakes and have missteps. I mean, the Ravens clearly made a mistake last year thinking that Patrick Owasso and Kenny Young could replace C.J. Mosley. It didn't turn out. They were wrong about that. So you're not going to have a perfect offseason in that way, but the point that you made as far as where the Ravens stand right now, that's where fans should feel really confident and more confident than perhaps at any point since, say, 2011, 2012, right around then. I mean, that's where this team is right now, coming off of a 14-2 season, having the MVP of the league under a rookie contract that's really affordable, at least for another year or two.
Well, it's a hell of a thing to say you're 14-2 and you're ascending.
I mean, well, you always like to think you're ascending. I mean, you never know how it's going to play out. That's why.
Well, the perception is you're ascending. I mean,
well, sure.
Yeah.
Well, but I think ascending, I don't know if it's ascending as much as they're in the midst of their window. I mean, that's where they are. So what can they do to improve themselves?
And to your point, the Rams were in a window for about a minute, right?
Right.
The Eagles were in a window and won it for about a minute, right? And our window was a minute because, they gave Joe Flacco money, Ray Lewis and Ed Reed went away, and next thing you know, they don't make the playoffs for 4 years in a row, right?
Right. I mean, that's where you have to be careful, and that's where the sting of January lingers because you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know what the schedule's going to look like. You don't know if you're going to stay as healthy as they stayed the last 2 years. You don't know if some of those guys that look like they're ready to take a step forward take a step back. I mean, things go wrong. And when you said they're ascending, I agree that they're in the midst of this window and still have as great of a chance as anyone out there to win a Super Bowl, but that doesn't mean you're going 14-2 again. That doesn't mean you're the number 1 seed again. They could be just as good from a talent standpoint or maybe even a little bit better, and that still might mean 12-4 or 11-5 depending on how things go with injuries and how the schedule falls. And, yeah, I mean, there are just a lot of variables that you don't know, but I think where Ravens fans do have to have some perspective over the next few weeks, we've reached that point in the offseason where what are we talking about? Free agent projections, talking about mock drafts. Everyone and their mother has a list of team needs across the board, and we know what the Ravens' needs are. You look at linebacker, you look at edge rusher, defensive tackle, wide receiver. Go down the interior offensive line if Yanda retires. So they have some very clear-cut needs, but I'll remind everyone that some of the positions I just mentioned were considered weaknesses or needs or relative weaknesses, let's say, last year in the midst of going 14-2. So they're not going to address every need adequately, at least, let me rephrase that, not adequately, they're not going to address every need with an elite addition. That's just not the way that this works when you're picking 28 and when you have cap space but not unlimited cap space. So they will certainly add players. They will certainly address positions that they need to address. But, yeah, they're still going to have a couple question marks here and there, but that's the NFL. And I wrote this last week at WNST.net. For me, when you're Eric DeCosta, John Harbaugh and company, you're looking at this team, and what are you doing? You're walking that fine line between evolving, between tweaking things and trying to make things better in that way, but not wanting to put yourself in a position where you're fixing things that aren't broken. And I think that's where you do trust the mettle of this front office, the mettle of this coaching staff to say, hey, yeah, losing to Tennessee, that stunk. That was a bad loss. It was really disappointing. It really soiled what was a special season. But that said, that doesn't mean we throw out the baby with the bathwater here and try to reinvent the wheel when you had a record-setting offense and a top-5 caliber defense. That doesn't mean they're not going to try to improve, and that's not to say they don't need to improve. But there's a lot to really like about this team, and I said this, and I'll stick by this. Even right now, if you told me the Ravens would largely sit out free agency, not make a big splash signing, sign some of their own, but mainly signing second and third tier kind of guys, and they just have, say, an average kind of draft, that might be an offseason that someone would say, wow, that sounds really disappointing. Guess what? I would still like the Ravens' chances as much as anyone in the AFC, other than maybe Kansas City under that scenario. So that just speaks to the kind of spot that this team is in right now and how much confidence Ravens fans should have. Now, they have a full offseason to get better. The scenario I just presented isn't what I'm predicting. It's just a hypothetical, but it speaks to just how darn impressive this roster already is. And with the opportunity now to get even better, that's an exciting thing. So there's going to be some rocky periods here. The Ravens are going to end up losing someone that people will have wanted to keep. I mean, this happened last year. The Ravens, at this time last year, thought they were going to keep certainly Terrell Suggs and thought they had a really good chance to keep C.J. Mosley. It didn't happen. Well, they went 14-2. So as much as right now there's unsettled feelings about what's going to happen with Matt Judon or what's going to happen with Marshall Yanda's football future, they're going to be fine. And I can guarantee you, short of some catastrophic kind of injuries in the spring or summer, I'm picking the Ravens to win the AFC North, and I'm picking them probably to at least go to the AFC Championship game. That's just where they are right now, and that's a good place to be. Now they have the opportunity here over the next couple weeks, and then, of course, with the draft next month, to take a team that looks like it's championship caliber and try to make it even better, try to evolve. But as I said, there is a fine line between evolving and not fixing things that don't need to be fixed. You don't want to be fixing things that aren't broken. That's where you do have confidence and you do have to lean into the experience of the front office and the coaching staff to say, hey, yeah, we need to fix some of these things or tweak some of these things, and Greg Roman's going to add some more wrinkles to this offense, and you're hoping that Wink Martindale doesn't have to blitz quite as much as he did last year because they've added another edge rusher that can help get pressure on the quarterback. But this was an identity that worked really, really well last year, and just because they lost in the divisional round doesn't mean you should deviate from that too much. So, and I think the Ravens understand that, and that's why this is an exciting off-season, even if there are some fair questions.
Well, this new CBA also really aligns a lot of things in regard to cap and money and future money in 22 and 23 and 24, when it will affect how much money Lamar Jackson's going to make if he's going to continue on this trajectory, as well as all of these quarterbacks, the Deshaun Watsons and the how much money our buddy Lee Steinberg's going to go and hit the Hunt family up for Mahomes in the aftermath of his championship now. So, and the CBA, look, I spend a lot of time in that world, and I pay attention to that, and I'm going to the owners' meetings in a couple of weeks down in Florida to sort of understand all of that and how it relates. But this is the most unique thing ever, that if they were to get this thing done without going to war in a March when the country's about to go to hell in a handbasket and deal with this creep down at 1600 Pennsylvania in November, they're worried about money, they're worried about markets, they're worried about coronavirus. I mean, obviously the owners have made a very, very concerted push here to try to get some cost certainty over the next decade so that they can move the game or move a franchise or two over to Europe and have this 17th game. All the dreams and desires of the owners to get richer and put some more money in the stocking of the players, that's all sitting here, and that's probably the biggest thing in all of this, right? I mean, that over the last 10, 12 days, this thing's looked close, then it's looked far away. Then it looks close, then it looks... If they can get that done, then the NFL can really continue the business of being the NFL.
Yeah, and that's where if I'm the players, I'm looking at this and saying, boy, the owners really, really, really want to get this thing done. And that's where I ask, have they gotten enough? And we'll find out. I mean, we're going to find out the results of the player vote. I mean, I thought it was fascinating that the executive committee actually recommended not voting for this, and then the player reps, of course, they voted and got it to a point where it's going to, it's the player-wide, league-wide vote for players. But all of what you just mentioned is where, if I'm the players, I do look at this and say, are we truly getting enough? And that's not to say that they're not getting anything, but when you consider they are playing another game and they're exposing themselves to more risk as far as injury and long-term ramifications and CTE and all the different things we've talked about for the last decade now.
But these players are looking at this and saying, over the next 6 years of my career, if I can make it 6 years, I'll play 6 extra games. I'll do it. Put me in. That's kind of that. This is where the lawyers and the doctors and the business people and the agents, all of this gets factored in. Yeah. But to the rank and file player, there's a lot of money here. There's a lot more money for any end of the roster, Nick Boyle type of player at this point than there was 20 years ago for that same football player who might have been an Ovi Mihaly or some guy like that, right? Like literally just a generation ago.
No question, and it's a lot different for someone like an Aaron Rodgers to be speaking about the CBA, and some veteran players we've heard be very outspoken about it, compared to I don't know, Patrick Owasso or some, Chris Board, guys that are on the very back of the roster.
Or even Lamar Jackson, who, if he plays well, he's going to cash plenty of checks. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah. I mean, Lamar, a lot of the issues we're talking about now don't apply to quarterbacks that are going to be making $30 or $35 million or, a few years from now, probably $40 million a year. I mean, that's just where this thing's going. But the owners know that, and that's where they throw some bones from a short-term standpoint, and that's where I think you do look at the players and say, well, a CBA lasting this long, considering we really don't have a good grasp on what gambling's going to look like, how lucrative it's going to be for the league. I think we all think it'll be lucrative, but how lucrative and what will that look like?
Well, the agents care a lot more than the players because the players are all going to be gone in 5 or 6 years.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and that's where the agents and that's where the executive committee and the leadership, that's where you take some pause at, from a player perspective and look at it and say, they were 6-5 against it. That's where you say, are they really getting enough? You look at the percentage of revenue sharing. You look at what the minimum spending on the cap is, which to me that's a big thing, especially if you're going to expand the playoff field. Should teams have to spend more than 90% of the cap over a 4-year period? I think the terms would be they do 3-3-4, something like that. But those are other issues that I think the players maybe could have asked for a little bit more. But these are very complicated, delicate negotiations. So I think it's easy to just take one or two issues and try to pick it apart from that standpoint. But you got to look at it universally, and to the point that you just made, that is what the owners are always counting on. It's a very limited earning window for all of these players. I mean, Tom Brady and guys like that are the exception of the exception, but even the best players typically are playing maybe a decade? And most of these guys are, most of the guys in the league are trying to hold on through one rookie contract. And if they do that, they're hoping that they're around long enough to get some pension benefits and things of that nature. So the owners know this, and they try to pit the players against each other, so to speak. And as history tends to suggest and reinforce, that usually works out pretty well from the owner's perspective. So we'll see. I mean, again, some of the pandering you've heard on both sides and some of the rhetoric on both sides, I do think it's interesting considering, it's not as though the CBA's up this year. We still have another year to go. So, but some of the issues that you mentioned with an election, with a TV deal coming up, these are things that the owners are mindful of in wanting to get something done here and now. So it'll be interesting, and I think that's why we continue to kind of see so much league business just not being held up necessarily, but certainly slowed down at the very least. Not knowing exactly what this thing's going to look like here for 2020. And I think it's been fascinating to see how this plays out. And we'll hopefully hopefully get a little bit of clarity one way or the other over the next 3, 4, or 5 days.
He is Luke Jones. He is Baltimore Luke, and Luke at WNST.net. If there's any breaking news, you'll always get it first on the WNST text service. Luke makes sure of that. It is all brought to you by Coons Ford of Security Boulevard. Dennis will be here on Thursday from 3 until 5, driving you home. It is the Dennis Colazzo Show. Reminder that Bruce Posner is also doing Terp Talk on Monday mornings from 8 until 9, and again at lunchtime on Monday. So we have other voices to be heard here, including the voices of Baltimore Positive. This week, that is Sheila Dixon, Ted Venetoulis, and Frank Kelly. We have heard from all of the mayoral candidates. You'll hear from all of them again later in the month and again on April 14th as we are ramping up our commitment to making Baltimore better and my commitment about a year and a half ago, along with our friends at Cole Roofing and Gordian Energy, to talk about community and charity endeavors, and that's led me to Don Moeller and Baltimore County Executive, and to State Fair, and to Fadley's, and to you with the important issues from anywhere out in the counties to downtown, how important it is that we all stick together through this period of time and lift our city and our community up. I'm into that. You're going to be hearing a lot more about it. Nasty at WNST.net finds me. Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, streaming live on our Facebook as well as our YouTube WNSTV channel. Make sure you're checking out Baltimore Positive. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports and Baltimore Ravens stuff.